Can you talk a little bit more about how you blend education and artwork into your work? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot, I think, I went to RISD for undergrad, and I think that, like a lot of young painters, I had this idea that, being an artist meant solely a studio practice. And, I sort of like recognized at that time that that wasn't entirely true, but I couldn't really prove it yet. So I started doing things like I worked with Umberto Crenca, who at AS220 and in Providence, and we did some kind of like renegade art education activist work and with printmaking and like kids in the local juvenile detention facilities and like just local activist kind of things. And then I also went to Brazil, um, and worked in the favelas and did a volunteer-based I just taught like art classes that were open to whomever wanted to show up, and there was no requirement, and it was always packed. My classes were always packed, and which was great. So it's like I think I recognized that even though I was insecure at that time, that I didn't know how to connect these pieces together. Instinctually, I knew they were really important practices to have in parallel. So at that early phase, I was still like, okay, I'm making 6-foot paintings that are really intricate and based on like textile patterns and like, are these sort of like epic exploration of like women's work and like invisible labor and all that kind of stuff. And I was doing that in the studio. And then outside of the studio, I was like doing education and activist work. And I like, it took me a really long time to take these two things and see them as not detracting from one another, but actually as healing and like and actually as making something that was uniquely the way that I would express myself in the world. And so, like right after RISD, I went into the New York City Department of Education, and I taught special needs art classes for, 4 years. It was like, I mean, there was a separation of time, but I over 4 years I did. I was teaching high school students, and so there was like a lot of like, okay, I'm going to go into education, or I'm going to go into my art practice. And then eventually, after, like, for instance, I got the Rauschenberg Power of Art Award, I was like, finally got to meet other arts educators who kind of saw all of these things much more connected than I had at the time. And it's kind of slowly over time, I realized, okay, I can use education as part of my art practice and vice versa, and see that as a practice, like one practice. So like, for instance, in my Our Stories of Migration kind of ongoing series, I oftentimes use textiles as the site for investigation. So it's like quilts. You think of quilts or something like that, like it's maybe intergenerational, or like brings families together, like tells the story of a family. And that's kind of how I saw these quilts. So I was like making these textiles, jacquard woven textiles, that had all kinds of images of textiles from around the world. And I was inviting the public to come and tell their own stories of migration, to write about it, to draw maps about it, and then to embroider their paths onto the map. So it's like I did that project at the Met. I've done the project, kind of in almost like a pop-up kind of situation, done it in various locations. Um, Most recently I did like a 26-foot version of it, using Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, which was really cool. And it basically connects all the land masses together to enhance the sensibility that humans, like migration is part of the human story. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of my work now, like when I think it's really good, it actually uses my education hat and my art hat. Like it uses all of that together. Like either I'm doing workshops or I'm doing something that, yeah, like invites participation, or even if I'm working with an institution that I get to work with their archives. So that's kind of how I'm using it now.
Wow. No, that's so cool. I didn't know that you worked in Brazil, and I didn't know you studied at RISD.